Hello and welcome to Declassified, the classical music podcast created and hosted by me, Robert Guy. In today's episode, I talked to Fergus McWilliam. Fergus is quite simply one of the greatest horn players around and was appointed to the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra in 1985 and retired just a few years ago in 2019. I first met Fergus back in 2014 when I was selected for the Conductors Lab held in partnership with the Berlin Philharmonic in Aix-en-Provence, southern France. Each day, for a week, I got to conduct members of the Berlin Phil, and it was inspiring and terrifying in equal measure. Fergus and I have kept in touch ever since, and he has been extremely encouraging and supportive of my career. I talked to Fergus about the philosophy behind the Conductors Lab, a conducting course that has no conducting teacher. I talked to him about his time in the Berlin Phil. He's got a brilliant story about his audition. Did you know when you audition for the Berlin Phil, you have to audition in front of the entire orchestra and conductor? And the conductor for Fergus was none other than Herbert von Karajan. He gives me so many magical music moments and musical recommendations that I could create a Spotify playlist just for this episode alone, never mind the whole series. And if you can stick with us to the end, there is some brilliant advice for all of us who are following our dreams and passions in a career in music. I can honestly say this has been one of the most enjoyable episodes I've done to date, and I really hope you enjoy it. If you're new to Declassified and this is your first time tuning in, you're very welcome and thank you. The music you can hear is by my brother John Guy, and it's called A Vision of Fire. John's just been down in Cardiff this week, having had a piece played by the BBC National Orchestra of Wales. And in this piece you can hear members from our new Sinfonia, professional chamber orchestra we created based in North Wales, and we're joined by 30 young musicians aged 8 to 18 who are playing with us. In any case, it's time to go and chat to Fergus.
In anticipation of this chat, I had so many questions. I was thinking about our past when you were in X and so on, and there were so many things I wanted to plug you and full of questions. So thank you for taking the time.
No, well, it was Aix-en-Provence in 2014, and I do quite a bit of conducting teaching now, and I've read your book, Blow Your Own Horn, and I wanted just to talk to you about the similarities between the philosophy behind your book and that course in Aix-en-Provence, which is a conducting course with no conducting teaching. And one of the experiences where I've learned most with no conductor in the room, apart from, no conductor giving feedback except the musicians in the room, and it was amazing. Was it deliberate, that psychology behind them?
That's intriguing that you asked the question, because I never thought of that, and I've never been asked that question before. No one's ever made that connection. I think the obvious answer would be, yes, it must have been, subconsciously. I mean, I wasn't aware. I did not set out deliberately to set up the course in light of that, what I'd done in the book. But as you will remember, the philosophy we all followed there at that workshop was a particularly Berlin Philharmonic approach to things. So it's something I don't have a monopoly on it. And my colleagues and I, we share the same philosophy of the collaborative nature of it, perhaps, as opposed to the hierarchical, the top-down sort of thing. The incredible potential for discovery, individual discovery, personal discovery, and personal the journey inwards to discover your own resources, whether it be learning to play the horn or learning how to stand in front of an orchestra and achieve something. There are similarities there, because in both cases, what we've done is we've removed the master, teacher, maestro, the expert. What we've done in both cases was to diffuse, if you will, like a mine or a bomb. We've diffused the political element and the power structure element of the expert who is in possession of all the knowledge, almost like remember the taxi cab drivers in London, they call it the knowledge. When I was a horn student, my teachers I revered them because they were senior. They possessed the knowledge I did not have. They had the key to the magic door behind which the great golden treasure of knowledge and success lay. And so I worshipped and was the willing supplicant in front of the teacher. And same thing is true in the conducting teaching situation. You have the master conductor, the teacher conductor, teaching you guys how to do it. This is endemic. This is the way it goes on all over the world. It's how a plumber learns his trade from his master and so on. It's unavoidable. We all know what it's about. Except there's one almost fatal flaw in it. It's like a little seed of poison in every piece of fruit that we eat, which is that it's the information is handed down to you from the master to the student, and inherently you're supposed to accept it as received truth. I love, as you may remember in my book, I quote Neil Postman and Weingarten, a book called Teaching as a Subversive Activity, back from the 70s. And I just love the title. The title alone speaks volumes. That real teaching, really effective teaching, is always one, in the end, of elucidating, of bringing out of the student the potential within the student. Most often, though, teaching works the other way around. because of the mutual collaboration of teacher and student, both sign up for this power disparity. Student says, I am the unknowing, I'm the inexperienced one, I'm the one who wants to learn. In fact, I'm handing over money, in many cases, to the teacher to acquire the information and skills that I need, which he or she possesses, presumably. And the teacher, and I know from personal experience, I don't know how many students I've had over all these decades, that inevitably, you cannot avoid it. As soon as a student is sitting in front of you, you have a sense of responsibility, hopefully, but you also have an immense power and authority.
Yeah.
Which is just imbued in you by the situation. And it can be abused, it can be misused, and it can be neglected, and it can be just wasted. So when you have this situation, what would happen? The question was, what would happen if you remove the teacher? And so when I use the title "Blow Your Own Horn," I'm saying, blow your own. Don't blow your teacher's horn. Don't try and placate your teacher. Don't try and be like your teacher. Don't try to imitate. Be yourself. Find out who you are and blow your horn your way. Well, you'll remember from the workshop that we were encouraging. What were we encouraging? You guys, as the conductors, to realize it's the musicians in front of you with whom you interact, and the dynamic of that experience. And the minute you put a conducting teacher in the situation, into the room, it disturbs that whole environment. I mean, when you stand in front of your orchestra, there's nobody looking up over your shoulder and interrupting and saying, no, you know what would be better if you tried this? Because in that situation, you've got a three-way player. It's like a ménage à trois, and it's not very pleasant. You've got your players trying to relate to you, you're trying to relate to them, and the whole time there's some character off to the right here interrupting all the time, and so basically inherently saying, hey, this is about me. I am the conducting teacher. Not only are you my student, but the orchestra being conducted are also somehow subservient actors in the whole dynamic. All of that creates a situation which is completely unnatural. Completely unnatural, has nothing, basically antithetical to the business of conducting an orchestra. The minute a conducting teacher is in the room, and that's how we tried this experiment, which went on for 3 years very successfully. So yes, to a long-winded answer to your question, I do see the parallel, and I hadn't made a conscious connection before. Thank you for that.
You all kept on saying it's a chamber orchestra. Listen, adapt, and be like another musician. Don't sort of beat it. Just listen and respond as if you were a musician in the orchestra. And I feel like I learned so much about conducting, playing viola in a string quartet, and it was that approach of the orchestra as a big chamber ensemble, listening. And when I've watched the orchestra play live, and when we were there, the level of listening that the people do, it's incredible. When you get conductors come and conduct the Berlin Phil, where's the balance between someone that listens and responds and is one of you, and also they're leading the way? Where's the balance point, and what do the orchestra look for?
Well, you can well imagine that the regular conductors who we see every year and every year afterwards, or throughout the year and so on, those are musical partners, friends we've had for decades in many cases, and they know us extremely well. And so there's that relationship already exists. They don't have to learn how to conduct us. We also don't have to learn how to perform for them or how to interact with them. The intriguing thing is when you get a new person, the debut conductor. And every year there was a certain number of weeks set aside to invite conductors the orchestra had not seen before. And usually they were younger conductors on the way up. Now, obviously, by the time they get an invitation to Berlin Phil, they're more than just on their way up. They've shortened. They've proven themselves already elsewhere. It's just we live in an ivory tower, under a glass bottle, and often didn't realize or experience much of what's going on in the world around outside the Berlin Philharmonic environment. So they arrive, and of course they're on the edge of their seat. They're inevitably a little bit nervous because they're trying to figure out how to manage this infamous orchestra. And I think they're also aware, because everyone will have told them, what you think you know, and what you think you've learned, and everything you've done up to now may not any longer be relevant. You're now on your own, and you've got to interact with this orchestra. You can't lead them, but you can't follow them. Karajan's advice to many of the younger conductors was very prescient. He said, don't overconduct. You can rehearse until you're blue in the face, but when it comes to concert, let them play. And he was also critical with his own conducting students that they understand where to conduct and where to not. What's important? Where does an orchestra need the conductor to be proactive and where not? And that's a critical difference. It's a vital thing to know. And you guys, you have this problem. You have to read each ensemble you're working with. How much do they need and where do they need it? And when is it time to let them go and let them make the music? My experience within the orchestra was when the conductors who understood this let us play, we inevitably returned the favor by inviting them back into the fray. If we've got the chance that, if we're like a horse, if we're being let loose to run, then we take the jockey with us willingly. And it's an incredibly difficult balance, isn't it? And it's kind of magic. It's mystery. And you only know you've overstepped the line too late.
Yeah. Because I was reading on your Facebook page that you were talking about your audition in front of the orchestra, and that was in front of Karajan himself. Could you tell me a little bit about that? I mean, what's it like playing in front of the Berlin Phil as an audition? I mean, it sounds terrifying.
Well, it's in a way, it's kind of two questions. I noticed that myself recently. A former colleague, David Cooper, now in the Chicago Symphony, put something up on YouTube, performing a piece for horn, which he then cites in his prelude. Before that, he tells the story of my audition, because this work saw the light of day at that audition. So that's how it got a little bit of Facebook coverage. And I can recommend to your listeners that if you follow that David Cooper Facebook thing about the Helmut Neuling Bagatelle, it's a pretty accurate rendition. He does me the credit of telling the story quite accurately. So the audition by itself in Berlin is traditionally in front of the entire orchestra, and the music director of the day is entitled to attend. Doesn't have to, and has no particular rights. But if they do attend, they get one vote, just like everyone else in the orchestra. And in close call, generally the emphasis is always on solo works. This is in contrast to some other countries. The solo repertoire is the essential stuff for the first couple of rounds. And if the instrument that is being auditioned has a concerto in the repertoire by Mozart, then Mozart is compulsory. Naturally, for horn, that gives us generally the choice of 3 of the Mozart concertos. And the violinists usually have a choice of up to 3 or more of the 5 concerto. However, viola, cello, double bass, trombone, and so forth. But lacking any Mozart concerto, they are required to play a classical concerto, and by some other composer. And then if you finally, get to the second or third round, so it gets that far, then orchestral excerpts will appear for the first time, which is pretty well the opposite way around from many other places where excerpts play a much more dominant role, and the solo concerto is a subsidiary or just a warm-up piece. Also, it's played with cadenza and full piano accompaniment. So, and the orchestra decides by majority decision whether to advance a player to a further round, or indeed to hire them for a probational period of up to 2 years. And at the end of your probational period, you are proposed for permanent membership, or tenure, if you will. And there you must receive 2/3 of the orchestra's vote in a secret ballot. Pretty high hurdle after 2 years. So that's so much to the procedure. And as for my particular audition, what was curious about it was that another member of the horn section, an older member, had remembered a piece from his youth, which no one knew at all. It was technically in print from a publisher at that time. We're talking about East Germany. This is back in the 80s. This company was out of business, out of print, and behind Iron Curtain. You couldn't get this music. So about 2 weeks before the audition itself, all of the candidates received in the post a Xerox copy of the horn part, no piano accompaniment. And we were told, please bring this to the audition. So we all tried to learn this thing, and it looked very, very curious. It was a very odd looking piece. And we had no idea what the accompaniment was like. We get to the audition, and I get the second round, I think it was, and I was the lead-off player. I was the first one to go out. So I'd be the first one to experience what this piece actually sounded like with piano. All the others had their ears glued to the door trying to listen to the piece and get to know it. And so I was depending on how you see it, I was either going to be the sacrificial lamb who would fall because the piece had to be learned, or else I'd have the advantage of being the first to go.
Yeah.
Well, in the end, we got out there and started playing along. And I was a little bit mortified, internally, because I found the piece very dubious and kind of macabre in a way. And I couldn't believe I was standing out there in front of the Berlin Philharmonic. I'm looking right down. There's Herbert von Karajan in the first row looking up at me. And I'm playing this rather trashy piece of music. And I couldn't imagine that we just finished playing Mozart, and now the Berlin Philharmonic wants to hear this. But at the same time, while these thoughts are going through my mind, I can hear the physical discomfort of the accompanist, who is also mystified by this piece. There are also some clashing printing errors in it too, which we don't know about. So it has some surprising dissonances, which made you think you played the wrong note. And then, of course, I started hearing the snickering and twittering among the audience, which is right there in front of me, the listening players. And it was getting a bit loud and unruly and hard for me to concentrate. And then I started hearing them starting to giggle. And then came a small 8-bar pause where the horn player can rest a bit, the piano plays. And one of what it turned out to be a double bass player, whom I became great friends with later, he literally lost it. He just guffawed out loud. But slapped his hands over his face and just, and burst out into laughter into his hands. And the whole place erupted. How infectious laughter is. And of course, me too. I could not continue. I just put my one down. I had to stop. The pianist was in hysterics. I was, giggling away. The whole place was falling apart. This was both the shock and horror and hilarity. The only person who was sitting there looking mystified with no expression on his face at all was Karajan. Just didn't get it. But he never did have a good sense of humor. But somehow or other, we managed to stop. We managed to get somebody from the orchestra's management or the committee asked everyone for peace and quiet. Come on, let's get this under control. I managed to get my face back together, and we carried on and finished the piece. And apparently, the approach I took, which was to take the mickey out of it, basically, was the winning approach.
Subscribe to the Digital Concert Hall every year, and one of my favourite concerts is the 1989 concert after the Berlin Wall came down with Daniel Barenboim conducting, and I was watching it, and I think you're there playing the horn with a beard, and I absolutely love that concert because they pan the camera around the audience, and you just see people listening so intensely, and a lot of people are crying. I wondered if you could tell me what it was like to play in that concert in Berlin just after the walls come down.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. It is possibly one of the most important and most intense concerts of my entire career. There may be one or two others in the same league, but this is certainly one of the ones I will never forget as long as I live. It was one of the most difficult concerts of mine because of the emotion surrounding us. You could cut the air with a knife. You could hear that sobbing, people gasp, struggling for breath. Daren't look up. Normally, as you say, we look around and interact with each other. But in this case, you may see, if you look at that clip carefully, most of the players' heads are down, constantly looking at the music and trying to stay concentrated because it was so emotional that it was all we could do just to not to lose control of our breath. It was a tremendously powerful performance. And of course, the choice of the seventh Beethoven and the slow movement was, monumental. And it was, I think, probably, objectively seen and listened to now, 30 years later, it's still a very good performance. Yeah. It stands on its own two legs.
I ask all of my guests what's their magical music moment. What would yours be?
Did you say plural? Moments?
Moments or moment. If you had to pick one or two concerts or experiences, what would they be?
Oh, I am so lucky to have so many.
Yeah.
That is so hard to choose from. I can remember doing a Bach concert, all Bach, with Karl Richter back in my Canadian days. Simon's Matthew Passions, where there's no horn at all, and yet I didn't miss a single performance, nor dress rehearsal, even on tour. I went to every single one of them because they were so breathtaking somehow. Raphael Kubelik's last performance with the Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra, also incidentally my last concert with them before moving to Berlin, Ninth Bruckner, where he was struggling with basically having a heart attack on stage. It was a medical emergency, and he was playing for his life. He was conducting as if he knew he was dying. As it turns out, he survived, which was great for music and for him, but it was one of the most revelatory and shattering Ninth Bruckners I've ever experienced. One that had consequences too in terms of how people tended to perform the Ninth Bruckner ever afterwards. It affected a lot of things. Leonard Bernstein doing a second Schumann in Budapest, which was so emotional. I couldn't describe it except when I was able to ask him later at a private moment what was going on. And he told me it was the anniversary of his wife's death, and this was her favorite piece. That's why he always, but it was so emotional.
So many moments.
Every Ninth Mahler with Claudio Abbado, just fry your nerves. Incredible things. There's so many. I just consider myself very lucky that I have. You asked me how my music magical moments was the question, and I consider my whole career to be magical. So I'm just very grateful.
How do you find it now, having been in the Berlin Phil for 34 years? Do you miss playing with that orchestra? Do you go back at all? How does it work when you retire from the Berlin Phil?
Well, I took the advice of an older colleague who talked to me when I was in my 40s, and he was about to retire. And he was a very integral member of the orchestra, one of the cellists. He was an orchestra chairman for many years. He'd been very important in many, many roles in the orchestra, and I looked up to him as a bit of a mentor. And I had asked him if he would join one of my committees as a elder statesman, to get a little bit of cachet. I thought it'd be nice to reactivate him again. And he said, I think he must have been about 62 or 3 at the time. And he said, oh, and by the way, for your listeners, we have mandatory retirement in Germany. So that's why you haven't got an option. When your number's up, when the clock runs out, you've got to go, as I had to. Anyway, he told me, thanks very much for the offer and for the honor, but I have already planned my retirement. from the age of 60, he decided to step back from all political activity in the orchestra, step by step, start withdrawing from chamber music a little bit, and just basically tone down, do less and less, so he could start distancing himself from the orchestra gradually, so that he said, by the time I have to step out the door, it's not like falling off a cliff, it's just taking a step down. And I never forgot that advice. So that when I hit my 60s, I did exactly the same thing. I started pulling back from my committee work and slowing down a wee bit and becoming less involved with the day-to-day affairs of the orchestra. Happily, I still had my wind quintet roaring along at high speed. And so when I also came to the point, they couldn't find a successor right away, so I was asked to stay on for a bit longer, I think a year and a half. But I knew he was an excellent point coming in. There was a big tour to the States coming with the quintet. I was going to be away for a while, and I could choose this date. And I said, I want to jump before I'm pushed, as it were. I thought, I chose my time to get out, and knowing it was going to be hard. But I thought as long as I was in control of the situation, choosing the date, choosing the repertoire, and then handling it that way. And I've had a very, very full life afterwards, which I never have had as long as I was in the orchestra. In a way, the Berlin Philharmonic takes your soul, takes everything. And so by leaving, finally, because I had to leave, but I have discovered a second life. Do I miss it? Sure. But am I glad I'm out of it? Yes.
Yeah. Do you still have any associations with Scotland? Do you ever go back home at all?
Yeah, well, my home, I was born in Loch Ness, the village of Doors, and have some pretty good friends in the village. And I'm still treated as a village elder when I get to the pub. Went to elementary school in Edinburgh, and I've got most of my family are down around the Edinburgh district. Some in the southwest in Galway, we call the Galway Irish down there, Stranraer and Kirkcudbright. And I was until very recently on the board of Big Noise, System of Scotland. I was on the board for about 10 years, and that brought me to Scotland 4, 5, 6 times a year in any case. And I have been teaching at the conservatory in Glasgow. So I have things going on in Scotland. And I had a flat in Glasgow until recently, which I no longer have, but very much a Scot still.
Next month, I'm conducting Schubert 9 for the first time. Lovely horn opening at the beginning. Do you prefer it in 2 or in 4? What do you want from the conductor?
I personally prefer in 2, but it's like those Mozart slow movements which are written andante or something, or lento or whatever, something like that, and then it says alla breve at the same time. I think that from my experience, it's been one of the magic pills, the magic bullet. If you're looking for a solution to a tempo, always try and group it into the largest units possible. 6/8 rondo 6/8, for example, often resolved if you think of them in 1, at least from a player's point of view. Unless it's a real wood shoe clog dance, where you're 2 really strong beats. But generally, saltarellos and tarantellas, they all have that sort of feeling in 1. And then anything that's in 4, I keep asking myself, can I do that in 2 somehow? Or even go bar-wise. It's perhaps that's something that we carry perhaps back from Karajan, the extremely long line. If a phrase is 8 bars long, can you actually make it phrase-wise rather than bar-wise? Mm-hmm. How big can you make the units? How big can you make the phrases, the units, the sentence, if you will? There's a lot of grammar involved here. How we speak and how we narrate, and even if a thing is mechanically organized in 4 beats, we actually might not speak it that way. We might not sing it that way. We'd probably use larger words.
Well, I'll try it too.
Depending on your players, they may ask for or respond positively to a little 3/4 before that.
Yeah.
3, 1, and maybe the first beat subdivided too. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1. But sometimes a subdivision can help. And then you need to get rid of it like the little training wheels on a child's baby bicycle. And that brings us back to that earlier question of how much to conduct and when and where. And it really is useful for a conductor to ask the players what they prefer, what they would like.
Yeah. What do you do when you get different answers from people in the same section?
Then the section's got a problem.
Right.
I would go for the first chair player first, because that's the obvious, the hierarchical. It just makes more sense to ask the section leader, and if somebody in this section says, "Well, I don't know about that," they should talk about it together. But otherwise, you get too many things, too many people.
Just before we wrap up, I asked all my guests for their magical music moment and also their musical recommendation. Is there someone, a composer or a performer, that you can recommend that perhaps isn't so well known at the moment? Or maybe it is and you just think you need to listen to this particular recording. Okay, we put it into a Spotify playlist for everyone to listen to.
Well, I'm a great fan of two particular pianists, but they'll be of no surprise to anybody. One is Stephen Huff, with whom I've done a lot of work with our quintet and so on. But I find everything he does magical and always surprising and new and fresh. And he makes me. Well, we've had so much fun together. He's constantly searching and opening new windows and doors and things. But I gather he's pretty much very established now. We've known each other, worked together 25 years, so we were all very young when we started together. The other one is more of a senior member of the parliament, and that's Manuel Ax, American-Polish pianist who I think everyone likes, everybody knows, but you really have to listen to what he does. It is quite phenomenal. And the breadth of his repertoire and the breadth of his expression and his vision, all packaged into the most delightful personality. No surprises there, I think, but those are two of my favorite pianists. Somebody I miss terribly is Herbert Haitink, who left us last year. But your question, excuse me, was who do I recommend and what, repertoire as well?
Some people have recommended a composer or a performer. I mean, you've given us three. I mean, Bernard Haitink was someone I was desperately applying for his masterclasses and never got quite accepted to study with him. But Bernard Haitink, Emmanuel Ax and Stephen Huff, three amazing people there. Going back to your magical music moment for one of the passions, I actually, it was the year after we'd worked, I think, or the same year, but I came and Michael, the flute player in the Berlin Phil, he gave me a third flute pass so that I could come and go. And it's my claim to fame because it's third flute Berlin Philharmonic. No one was playing, but I could just come and sit and watch the rehearsals. It was absolutely amazing. And then the year after I queued from 10 o'clock in the morning to watch the Berlin Phil. The years afterwards he came, and just love that atmosphere. But yeah, just nice that one of your magical music moments was a memory that I remember, just watching Simon Rattle rehearse The Passion.
Oh yeah. And the other one you mentioned yourself was the Das concert, the one that's what the wall concert, the December the 12th, 1989, that you yourself suggested as absolutely one of the absolute high points.
Just before things wrap up with all my guests, I just play a little game at the end, and I was wondering initially whether this one would be relevant, because the first one I say is Manchester or London, someone that lives not in the UK, but if you had to answer, which one would you say? It's the north or the south, basically. Manchester or London?
Well, I'm a local here. I'm a northern patriot. I know I have a bias, having my daughter-in-law being from Manchester, Mancunian. I don't think much of your weather there, but then that's rich coming from a Scot from the north. But I do empathize very strongly with the difficulties of living in Great Britain, anywhere north of St Albans, which is the wild north,
Yeah.
I know people in London and the south who have never been to Birmingham, haven't been north St Albans, and for whom the north is somehow the land of the wild blue painted savages.
Niche or mainstream?
Well, you look, here is a classic mainstreamer right here. I've spent my whole life being nothing more than always mainstream. Being so heavily involved in mainstream, though, I've missed the niches.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it does get through to Berlin, and we did. Of course, if you look at the repertoire, not just of the years I was in the orchestra, go right back to the very beginning of the orchestra, and it had a tradition, actually, of bringing new music every single concert. Even Furtwängler and Nikisch and those years, Bülow, the idea of bringing contemporary new music to every concert was completely normal and fully expected. It lost a little bit of that in the 60s and 70s, 80s with Karajan, where he was getting older and concentrating on his core repertoire and the business, the big repertoire, the big romantic stuff that all the records were making. And then Abado broke the repertoire bubble wide open again, followed by Simon Rattle and now Petrenko bringing in all these fascinating composers that no one knew of, Schmidt and Rudi Stephan and so on, the underlit late romantics and non-modernists and so forth. So actually the orchestra had a tradition of being not niche, but very wide open for experimenting with repertoire. And so I did enjoy that, of course. But the niche, sort of the specialty issues, things that we were protected from that, unfortunately, a little bit too much.
Virtual or live?
Live.
And conductor or no conductor?
Reserve opinion on that. You know what they say about condoms? Same as, you know the phrase?
Yeah. Safer with, better without. I've got a lot of students currently studying undergraduate music, going into a music world that has changed considerably after COVID. If you had a general piece of advice to them, what would it be?
Ooh. Well, when I started my very first horn lessons back in the 60s, I was an 11-year-old. And my parents were told, oh, it's fine, making music's fine, but what's his story? He wants to be a professional musician, professional horn player. I mean, no, there's no chance. There are no jobs. And there literally were no. I'm 1960s, and there was nothing going on. Remember, we were in Toronto, Canada by that time. We'd emigrated, and there was nothing. And yet I had wanted to do nothing other than play the horn in a professional orchestra since the age of 5. It's all I wanted. I dreamt of it night and day. My advice, or let's put it this way, no matter how rough or how small the chances look to be, if you are passionate about it and you have to do it, then friends, you have to do it. And it will happen. You will make it happen. It's much harder to answer this question from somebody who is tremendously talented, perhaps a Wunderkind, who is being supported or even pushed by parents and teachers alike, might be getting scholarships, might be being a visible and obvious success, but with no prospects. That is somebody who has more gift and more advantage than perhaps their desire. Compare that to somebody who's got all the desire and perhaps none of the gifts, or not as many. It's likely, it's entirely possible, the one with the desire, the drive, the hunger, that individual is more likely to succeed in any environment, no matter how difficult it is. What is harder is the sense, I don't mean this in a cruel way or a cynical way. If you have a sense of entitlement, which comes with being gifted and having been promoted and being supported and so forth, you have expectations. You start to play with and in the same circle of other like talented and supported individuals. And you can sense a very strong sense of competition and latent aggression. I mean, you're all chasing the same, like those greyhound dogs chasing the fake rabbit around the course. And an outsider, the one who's having to work harder for everything, in the end has the better chances because they've learned early on how to dig down deep and to find their own resources and to ask themselves, just how badly do I need this? What am I going to put up with? How much blood am I prepared to spill? It's a tough world out there, yes, but it's there for those who are really willing to give it everything. And to the extent that our new social media world, our new world of streaming, where young players today can acquire any piece of music they like online. They just have to press a button and it spits out of their printer. Probably they only read it on an iPad anyway. And in too many cases, a student will come in with something prepared and say, yes, I listened to this on YouTube. They prepare a tiny little passage and I say, well, who did you listen to? Well, the first one that came up on YouTube. I mean, there are a lot of young players today who are seriously out of touch or never getting in touch with the nature of performing music live, for real people in a real environment. I know how difficult it is to get a chance to perform real music for real people. But it's only when you do that, when you go out and test your strength and your depth on the real stage, that you find out whether you're cut out for this. And hence, I ask myself too, as a parent, now as a grandparent, how many favors am I actually doing my young people by helping them too much? Should I not be leaving them to hunger a wee bit, to make them fight for stuff more? In the end, that they might be more successful. It's this is the question to the young players today. You're all from a generation which has lacked for nothing, basically. And you have access to all the music in the world instantaneously. And you've never had to fight. You've never had to write away to a shop in a back street of New York City, asking if you could possibly buy a copy of one part of one symphony, an actual orchestral part, and pay a whopping price, $40 or something for this one little thing, and maybe get it 9 months later, if you're lucky. And this is the first time you've ever seen the notes for this particular symphony. This is before the days of excerpt books when they came out and things of this sort. And now, of course, it's all available instantly. And in a world where everything is available instantly, everything can be heard. Look at our digital concert hall, for example. The amount of phenomenal music that you can just plug on and hear anywhere you like, on your phone, on your TV, on your computer, in your earpods, you can do while you're running. It's fantastic what's available today compared to my generation. And I hear a lot of young players today who can play virtuosic rings around the sun. And at the end of it, I have to ask, and your point is? Mm-hmm. They can play anything, but they can't say anything. Mm-hmm. That's not their fault.
It's the same for conductors as well.
Success will always come for those who have something to say.
Yeah.
Who have a message, who reach their audience and communicate.
That is amazing advice. I was about to say I wish I could just hit record and save that, but the good thing is I have done. So
there we go, the modern day.
Thank you so much, Fergus. Thank you so much for giving your time, and I hope that everyone that listens to Declassified, the podcast, and it's people from around the world, really enjoys this episode. Thank you for coming.
This was fun. Thank you very much.
Thank you to you, the audience, for taking time to listen. I do hope that you're finding the chat inspiring and thought-provoking. If you can subscribe or follow on whichever platform you listen to your podcasts, I would really love that, as it helps build the profile, and please do spread the word of Declassified. If you've got any comments or feedback, please just reach out to me and let me know, as I've had a number of people do so, and it really helps me to know how things are coming across the radio waves. Thanks to Joe Blomfield for editing this episode, and to John Guy for the music. And until next time, have a great week. Bye bye.